This is Remote Daily, your daily dose of inspiration. This is Remote Daily, an oasis. Find your soul, your heart. Connect, act, recharge with Remote Daily. This is Remote Daily.
Yes, this is Remote Daily. And Dario, as a quick introduction, may I ask you how you found our guest today, Tere? How do you guys know each other?
We met. Wait, I'm gonna turn down my river. Yeah. So we met in London like 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, I was touring in London and I played in a beautiful place called Latin American House. It's a venue for events and stuff related to Latin America. And she was there, and she we had an interview. I was interviewed by her, I think, right? And yeah, and I was very. I was talking to her, and she told me that she's an artist, and I looked at her stuff, and I thought it was amazing, and all the art she's doing is related to Latin America, and we were in touch we've been in touch for these last years, and like last year I think I made the music for one of the her exhibitions,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah. So
All
for the
right.
first Neo Norte promotion material, I made the soundtrack. So yeah, and I follow her on social media, and I think the projects she works on are very very good.
I'm now going to ask you something that we haven't
Hmm.
agreed on, or I haven't even asked you before. If you see art today from Tere in the next 20 minutes, and you want to play something alongside with it, because we're going to look at more for art, please do. I would love to hear what you associate with it, and
Sure.
what you want to say about it through your guitar, about her art. And what you just did when everybody was showing her art was just beautiful. Was showing their art was just beautiful to have your sound in the background as well. So thank you for that. And
Thank you.
Tere, welcome on the stage. Thank you so much for being here in your attic in the London church. It's great to have you. And may I ask you, Tere? I know that it's your artist name. What is your like passport name?
Oh, well, in Latin America, it's very common. We have like two names and two surnames because we keep the father's and the mother's surname. So actually, my passport name would be Maria Teresa Chadwick Irarrázaval. So it's quite a long name. That's why I use Tere Chat.
Beautiful. So you picked sort of like the middle, the heart of your name, and went out there in the art world. What a beautiful name. And where in Chile did you actually grow up?
In Santiago, that's the capital. It's in the Central Valley.
In the Central Valley. And of course, Chile is, I think, probably the longest country vertically in the world and one of the narrowest ones. It's a very special place. It's rugged. It's hard to maneuver as a traveler. It's very, very spread out with lots of cultures colliding all the way to Easter Island, which we looked at in the beginning. And we will now look at the first artwork here today that you suggested to share with us, which is called the Re-Enlightenment. And I would just, while fire up the screen share here, ask you, Tere, to explain to us what we are about to see here. What is this artwork all about?
Well, I've actually already explained some about it because
Mm-hmm.
this is the piece I was speaking of that I constructed in Andalusia in the south of Spain. I did it using the technique of the earth ships. I used recycled bottles with cob and basically using the materials I found in the land. So then those animations you can see up, like those kind of like shades, are actually images taken with some pinhole cameras in the sculpture made by an artist friend called Olga Suchanova. And they were actually covering the piece with beeswax because I wanted to make it waterproof so that it would resist the rain. But now I've been studying how I could replicate this sculpture in a public space in a bigger dimension. So the maquette I presented to you, it's actually like a 1 to 10 scale. So it would be in real scale, like 5 meters tall. And what I like about that piece, in contrast to maybe conceptual art, because in a way, and there might be people in the audience who would not agree with me, but I feel that in the fine arts we are a bit stuck in Duchamp, and we haven't progressed much in the last century. Maybe there has been a big progress, I would say, with in technological terms, with digital art, but in conceptual terms, I don't understand why still sometimes I see like kind of people trying to imitate Duchamp, because for me he was already a century ago, so that's quite old fashioned if you think it from nowadays. And in a way, there's a very good description from this Spanish philosopher called Jose Ortega Gasset in his book that I don't know which would be the right translation to English, but it would be something like the dehumanization of the arts, because in Spanish is la deshumanización del arte. And he describes how we change from the primitive man, where we approach the aesthetics through our sensibility and touching really, to then observing what's outside from us, to then the period that it's a very in the Western world where there was lots of portraits, to then understanding the artist. But now we're so stuck like in the ego of the artist that sometimes I feel very frustrated when I go to exhibitions where I feel that the
Mhm.
artist is not really willing to have a conversation with the audience. And and somehow when you see how the corporate world is evolving, that each time with social media it's more open, and they want to have conversations with the different stakeholders, even in the something like the World Economic Forum or something like that was in Davos. Can't remember if it was 2019 or 20. They were speaking about the stakeholder economy instead of the
Yeah.
shareholder economy. So as we see this trend in the corporate world, I haven't yet seen strong trends in the art world to start thinking of how incorporating the audience in the creation of artworks. Because in a way, if we're using public funds to create monuments in a public plaza, then why we don't do like a survey asking people what they want? And in that way, what I like about the realignment as a project is that you will need to invite a community to recycle, to be part of making this monument. And also what's nice about it is it works as a kind of like interactive piece, because when you go inside, you see the light shifting and changing through the different lights and colors of the glass bottles. But it also works as a musical instrument because it starts blowing and it
Mhm.
almost feels as if it was breathing. So in a way, it kind of like gives hopes in the sense that we could feel that waste can be reused and can breathe back again. So I guess that's the spirit of the realignment, but it's still a project in research.
What an amazing statement here for things to be changed in the art world. Thank you for that, Tere. And I saw a lot of nodding here in the room and approval in the chat as well. Actually, some people also compared you to Gaudi here in the chat. So interesting associations that come up when people look at your art, which is always the most beautiful thing. It stops you in your tracks. You start thinking about something new. It changes your perspective. And but saying that, I would love to lead everybody to Tere's website right now. I love your website. It's beautiful. And there's one thing that especially caught my attention. We're going to talk about that now, which is you on one of your sub sites, the exhibition site. There's a world map, and it's upside down. Why is that?
Well, that started actually with the creation of the Latinos Creative Society of the University of the Arts London. Because when I was studying at Central St. Martin's, I started meeting lots of Latin American people around, and there was a common feeling that there's that the contemporary arts of Latin America, it's somehow diminished or underrepresented. Because, for example, what happens is that first of all, there's conflict between the countries, because so people from the outside see Latin America as something cohesive that's united, but in the inside there's lots of like different political kind of like
Right.
discussions. So what I think that happens at the end is that, as in Latin America, we don't have enough maybe appreciation or understanding of the value of sponsoring culture. People who are talented, they go abroad. So then it's very common that, for example, artists who go abroad, they mimetize or get involved in the art scene either in Europe or in North America, and then they're seen as North Americans or Europeans. So, for example, many people think that Lucio Fontana is Italian and not Argentinian, or that Alejandro Jodorowsky is French and not Chilean, or that Mario Testino they think he's Italian and not Peruvian. So at the end, what happens is that we end up exporting culture and it doesn't retribute back to the continent. And the image that people have about Latin America is a very narrow stereotype of the kind of like Mexican actors that they put in the Hollywood movies. And I'm not saying that that stereotype does not exist, because stereotypes have sometimes some part of true, but I think that Latin America, to think is as a unique stereotype, is a mistake, because it's a continent made by multiple migrations and diverse groups. So it's a multiplicity of ethnicities that they mix together as a collage. So something that for me has been quite shocking about living in Europe is that, for example, when you travel to Germany or to Italy or to Spain, you see a very defined architecture style. But when you go through the streets in countries in Latin America, actually, you see sometimes in one street like a German house, a Spanish house, an Italian house, an English house, and then you see whatever the a symbol of a native tribe. So this is a way you kind of like grow up, and even in the school you study like, and you have to read from different countries in Europe. So we have a sometimes a more mixed background, and I think Latin America is much more than just the typical stereotype. And that's, in a way, we haven't been enough wise as a continent to try to change this perception, because what I feel is that what I've most learned here while living in the UK, that I've been the past 4 years, is that because first you have this impression that if you're going to arrive to the so-called first world and everything's going to work and going to be perfect, but then you actually realize that poverty exists, that there are lots of troubles, that it's, and you kind of like stop seeing the big difference. But what for me the biggest difference is that here they're very good in marketing. So actually they teach people since they're very young to think that here they have all the opportunities. So then people grow up and they believe that and they fight for that. Whereas in Latin America, we are brought up thinking that we are underdeveloped. So for example, when I was in school, I remember when I tried to propose something different or complain for something that was not working, I had sometimes teachers telling me, well, but this is a mediocre country. So if you want something that works well, you have to go to the Nordic countries or to England and to the first world. Don't expect more here. And I think that that's not really the right mentality. And it's because we don't encourage to promote our culture and to position it and to empower it. And nowadays, that especially with how all that has happened in the US in the last couple of months, and when you see this big global crisis, I think that the global south has a big opportunity to empower themselves and to present a different narrative. So that's why what I try to attempt throughout my project, Neo Norte.
And we're thank you so much to continue the discussion on here. What you just said, I loved all your notes on, taking art as a way to explore identity and taking art as a way to reveal insecurities that were instilled for generations. And also, yes, just seeing the fact that marketing, storytelling is what helps the North to succeed, with, of course, with a lot of economic power behind it. And going back to what Kyoko held into the camera, you have put together an amazing exhibition, and I'm going to put it up on the screen share right now. And I ask you to just walk us through some of the things we can see here in this exhibition that you are showing as a curator of your project Neo Norte.
So actually, Neo Norte means New North. This, for example, this room was about migrations. So it was contrasting the different migration processes as creative destructions, because actually migrants arrived to a place to create something new. So that's why it had this kind of like deconstructive ceramic sculptures from Sofia Donovan, with the other tents that were kind of like in a reconstructive force. Then that installation, it's actually my installation. It's called, that's dedicated to the Selknam, that was a tribe in Patagonia that was extinguished through a very sad genocide. So I painted these petrol barrels with the body paints of the Selknam in a way to contrast of what has remained and vanished in our post-colonial era. Then these are some digital paintings, because in this room I was trying to contrast the digital materiality with the handcrafts, and that's why you see lots of textile work. And then this other room was about shamanism. So the idea was to try to present and speak about shamanism from both the pre-Columbian perspective, but also a Western perspective, because at the end, that's what our culture is a mix of visions. So you cannot really understand Latin America without understanding the West, and you cannot understand neither Latin America without understanding the pre-Columbian cultures. So Neo Norte was firstly presented in Fundación Cultural de Providencia in Santiago, Chile. Then this was in 2018, and it was also inspired in the concept of Joaquín Torres Garcia, who's an Uruguayan artist, and he proposes the School of the South, or Escuela del Sur, because what he was saying is that we need to, in order to progress in Latin America, we need to forget this nostalgia of comparing ourselves with the North constantly, and we need to appreciate and value our own culture. So that's why he's speaking about the School of the South, in a way that's saying that we have much more to do looking forward to the South than looking to the North. And when you think that Chile and Argentina have the biggest reservoirs of water of the world in Patagonia, actually you realize that the biggest natural resources are in Latin America. And that's why I think that it's nothing to be ashamed of. And I sometimes feel very sad, because some people, they feel very like ashamed of being Latin American. And I think we need to change this conception that we have to be in charge of our own culture and to promote it in a different way, instead of allowing external people to promote it for us. And in that way, regarding Kyoko's piece, I think she brings actually an interesting topic to the table that has a relation with Neo Norte. Because also another task that I'm trying to do with Neo Norte is, so what happens is that usually in Latin America, about what I've seen in exhibitions and what I've spoken with other Latin Americans I've been collaborating through the past years, we have this obsession to copy what's going on in Europe or in North America. So then in our culture, when you think about the Spanish we speak, that's actually not Spanish, it's actually Castellano. Each country has a different type of Castellano. So we have lots of like slang words that are actually not slang words. They're actually words from the different indigenous cultures that were in the different countries. So sometimes, and this is a problem that many Latin Americans encounter, we're speaking with the people from Spain and we realize that we don't use the same words. So then if we have already this kind of like intermingling in both our genes and our vocabulary and the way we express ourselves, why do museums, in a way of copying what they do in Europe and in North America, they keep on kind of like with the same narrative? And what happens is that it's very difficult in a contemporary museum or in a modern fine art gallery to find work that could speak from a folkloric language or from an ethnic language. So usually the ethnic or the, let's say, aboriginous art is kept for the pre-Columbian museum or the ethnic museum as seen as something exotic, when it should be seen as part of the culture. So what I've done in each of the editions of Neo Norte is inviting at the same time people who come from a Western background and people who come from an ethnic background, and to present their works together. And I know some kind of like more academic curators feel very uncomfortable with this. And I have had these discussions because they tell me, well, but your project has no structure. And I tell them, well, maybe from your point of view, it doesn't have a structure, but from our point of view, if you go to Latin America, you actually realize that our culture is a collage. So we cannot understand Latin America and see it as a kind of like segregation, because it's a mix of different factors that make this very rich culture. And I think we have to be proud of it and not try to see it as something like to keep it and hide it in the kind of like as an exotic object of the ethnic museum. So I think that in that way, we can change or propose narratives.
Thank you so much, Tere. You just reminded us, I think, the Remote Daily team here about the conversation we had with the Lonely Planet, because it's exactly about that. When you write a travel guide, you build a world and you put people into that world and they go with you through that world. And that is the perception they have when they enter this place. And just like that, you do it with a gallery or with a museum. You build a world, and when you perceive something as exotic just because it's strange to you or foreign or you don't understand it, well, how about the people that know about that place or are from that place? How do they look at that? And it's such a huge shift of perspective that is happening, I think, right now. And I think it's happening thanks to your generation, actually. So I would love to hear from everybody here in the room if you have questions for Tere. And while you think about your questions, you already have brought up some very, very great points here in the chat. No one should be ashamed of their heritage, says Anne. This is a topic still to be resolved in all of Latin America, says Kyoko. And Sarah says, of course, Europeans and North Americans keep borrowing from Latin American and African art while perpetuating this narrative of the first world. So I would love to hear your comments or questions. I would have one more for you, Tere. When you look around this room, you see people, including myself, that are 1 or 2 years older than you. What is your message to us, to like the older generation, as somebody from the next generation? You are impacted by what we do or what we have done. You have to deal with it. What would you like to say to us that are older than you?
I think I personally feel this is a very personal opinion. I personally feel you cannot be judgmental about things that have been done. I sometimes feel very frustrated when I see people judging things of the past with the eyes from now, because we have to construct the future. We can, I mean, there's no point. I mean, it's important to analyze, to study history, because that's the way we evolve as a civilization. But we need to keep also open conversations, because what I feel it's a risk sometimes with these new ideologies that I think they're changing the world in a way and that we need them. But also I think there's a risk of falling into a kind of like neo-fascism, where we stop having conversations and we stop listening to different opinions. And I think that our younger generation, we must listen to older people. And we might disagree, but it is important to listen to older people, because in that way, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. I think we have to use their experiences to improve things, but negating their experiences, I think that there's a big risk there. And I think that in that way, like new media and social media, even though it does amazing things, like we can have this conversation today with different parts of the world, that this would have been unimaginable 20 years ago, even though it opens up this amazing things. On the other hand, it sometimes reduce language and reduce the way we analyze things, because in social media we have one adjective, like or dislike. So I think that's why we need to, I mean, and also I think that for the people of the older generation, we're living in very interesting moments in history and a big moment of change. And probably we haven't seen as a big global crisis as we have experiencing now. I think we're not able to to that dimension, the kind of like the big revolution we're experiencing. And of course, when you're older, you're more conservative because you have more things to lose, and that makes you feel very anxious. And I think that for all the generations, it's important to try to keep open as well and to try to learn from new generations. And I think it's very important to have these kind of discussions where we mix people from different generations.
Thank you. Tere, we're going to do that right now. We have time for about 3 questions. Sarah raised her hand first, then Rashad, and then we have space for one more. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, I have 2 questions, but I'll just ask one. And I'm asking this more to hear your answer than because I believe what I'm about to say. But I'm curious, like to people who would argue that Latin America needs, economic development or something sort of related to what I'm going to call capitalism. And that there are people who are very poor or whose human rights are being disrespected, like some of the indigenous peoples, and that they don't need art. I'm curious what you would say about the role of art in, I think particularly people in richer countries, but sometimes also in poorer countries, see art as a luxury that poorer countries can't afford. And I'm curious, I obviously passionately disagree, but I'm curious to hear what you would say.
Well, I guess that's a very complex matter, and I would totally agree with you. It's difficult to have art development if you don't have an economical development. That's a fact. That's right. But on the other hand, I think that it is important to define a difference between culture and art, because one thing is a kind of like fine art for the collectors in Christie's and Sotheby's. The other thing is all the types of arts expressions that you don't need money for it. Sometimes you go through very poor towns in Latin America and they look like a poem inside. And you feel that you're like in a kind of like surreal world. So actually, I don't think that you need to be rich to generate art. And more for me, more about than maybe I agree with you. Of course, it's a priority. And for me as an artist, it's frustrating, but of course it's a priority to make people to overcome poverty than sponsoring fine artists to go to Christie's. I would agree with that. But on the other hand, sponsoring the culture brings tourism to the region, brings more people wanting to study there. So it also brings an economical benefit. So it is kind of like, it goes together.
Thank you. No, to be clear, I'm not arguing that. I saw a T-shirt yesterday that said poetry is not a luxury. And I feel very strongly that, I think we talked about this on the Poetry Day. William Carlos Williams said it's hard to get the news from poems, but men die every day for lack of what is found there. And I think that, your art does the same thing. I'll let someone else talk now.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you, Tere. I will pass the mic on to Rashad.
Yeah, hi, Tere. Thanks for being here. Terrific session. My question may be a little bit out of left field, but I'd like your opinion on, the recent movements around the world about countries trying to get their cultural heritage back from countries that have essentially stolen their art and parked them in museums of their choice. How do you think that should be handled? Because there are 2 sides to the argument in terms of the countries that currently hold them versus the country of origin. Thank you.
So I'm not an anthropologist or an archaeologist to give you a deep opinion in this matter. I can only, and I don't come from any indigenous tribe, so I haven't felt that anything of my culture has been stolen. So that's why I first I want to introduce this. But I can tell you my experience in 2 occasions that I have seen different opinions about it. So once I went in CEPAL, that I can't remember the translation of this institution in Santiago, to the presentation of a movie from some people from Easter Island, some Rapa Nui people that are indigenous from Easter Island, that they went to the British Museum and tried to ask the British Museum to return the famous Moai statue that's in the British Museum. So the person that was a Rapa Nui man who directed this movie after presenting the movie that tells the story of where the Moai was, that was in Orongo village, that was the village where they did the Tangata Manu, that's the Birdman ceremony. So it's a very emblematic and important place for the island for the rituals and their spirituality. And when he explained all that, so at the end, he was also saying, well, actually what happens, and he was recognizing it, is that the Chilean government does not have enough of a strong funding for heritage to preserve the sculpture. And he was even amazed while seeing the sculpture in the British Museum of the condition that the good preservation condition that the sculpture was there, in contrast to the moais that are in the island that are constantly being eroded with the wind. The other thing that it's very problematic to judge nowadays is that most of these objects, sometimes they were stolen, but other times they were exchanged. So I know that in some cases that it's a culture I studied a bit more in Israel. In some cases, for example, the European or from North America voyagers, they exchange 2 chickens and a cow for the Moai statue. And of course, now you think, and they were taking advantage and it was an unfair exchange. But I mean, it's like if I sell an art of work now and then I become a famous artisan and they sell it in millions in pieces, then I can complain, really. So that's also another issue. So having said that, I had the experience at the Royal College of Art of inviting Jago Cooper, who is the curator of the British Museum for the Americas. He's a fantastic person, very, very interesting. I think he has done also lots of like programs for BBC. You can easily find his things online. And also this topic came back again, because I guess it's a topic, it always comes with these museums. And he was narrating to us, and I'm kind of like repeating his answer. He said that, so that at the moment, the British Museum is working with lots of the communities that they have their objects. And in a way, they also, I mean, I'm not justifying the fact of stolen objects. I think that's horrendous, and we should not, and we should acknowledge that. And it's important to acknowledge it in the museum. I think it's important that the museums acknowledge this as a history of the origins of the museum. But on the other hand, Jago was telling us that there are lots of communities that are actually quite happy to have their objects in the museum, because then they give more visibility to an international audience to learn about the culture. So I guess this is always this, it's a never-ending discussion.
It is one of the biggest topics in art, and I thank you for bringing it up and for trying to take a stance on it, Tere, because it's one of them. I think the 2 questions here had so much complexity to it, but we can already see why you are famous in your world and why you are so successful, because you have just gifted us with a lot to think and a lot more to look at. For everybody in the chat, we have shared Tere's social media links and also recent press that you can follow. I also highly recommend to check out her website. It's a treasure trove, not only of her work, but also on her perspectives. And I just want to share some virtual glitter here. For Tere Chad, our guest today, artist from Chile, joining us live from London. Thank you so very much.